The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla walked through the corridors with measured steps. Her emerald green dress rustled softly against the polished stone, and her jewelry caught the light filtering through the tall windows. Today felt different from other days, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. The palace staff moved around her with their usual efficiency, bowing respectfully as she passed. But there was something in their eyes she hadn't noticed before. Camilla had been queen for nearly 2 years now, following Charles's passing from a sudden illness that had shocked the entire Commonwealth. The transition had been anything but smooth. Unlike the beloved Diana or even the respected Elizabeth, Camilla faced constant scrutiny from both the public and those within the palace walls. Newspapers still questioned her legitimacy, and social media buzzed with comments about whether she truly deserved the crown. The morning briefing with her private secretary, Margaret Thornfield, had been particularly tense. Margaret, a woman in her 60s who had served the royal family for over 3 decades, sat across from Camilla in the Queen's private study. The room, decorated with portraits of previous monarchs, felt heavier than usual as Margaret delivered the day's updates. "Your Majesty," Margaret began carefully, "there have been some developments regarding the staff's loyalty concerns." She paused, choosing her words with diplomatic precision. "Several senior members of the household staff have been meeting privately. They've expressed doubts about certain protocol changes you've implemented." Camilla's fingers tightened around her morning teacup. The protocol changes Margaret referred to were simple modernizations she had tried to introduce, allowing staff to speak more freely during briefings, reducing some of the more archaic ceremonial requirements, and attempting to create a more relaxed atmosphere in the palace. To her, these seemed like reasonable adjustments for the 21st century. "What kind of doubts, Margaret?" Camilla asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "They feel that some traditions should remain unchanged. They worry that the monarchy's dignity might be compromised if we become too casual." Margaret's diplomatic language couldn't hide the real message. The staff didn't think Camilla was fit to lead these changes. Throughout the morning, Camilla noticed the subtle signs of resistance Margaret had mentioned. The head butler, William Hartwell, who had served the royal family for 25 years, responded to her requests with barely concealed reluctance. When she asked him to arrange a less formal lunch setting for visiting dignitaries, his "Of course, Your Majesty," carried an undertone of disapproval. The palace guards, traditionally silent and stoic in their red uniforms and tall black hats, seemed to watch her with particular intensity. Captain James Morrison, the head of the Royal Guard, had been especially distant lately. During their weekly security briefings, his responses had become increasingly curt, and he often exchanged meaningful glances with his subordinates when he thought she wasn't looking. By noon, word had reached Camilla about a gathering planned for that afternoon. The senior staff, including Captain Morrison, the head butler, the chief housekeeper, and several other key personnel, had requested an urgent meeting. No specific agenda had been provided, but Margaret's worried expression told Camilla everything she needed to know. The tension in the palace had been building for weeks. Small incidents had accumulated like drops of water, eventually forming a flood. When Camilla had suggested allowing photographers to capture more candid moments during state functions, the staff had resisted. When she had proposed serving more contemporary cuisine at formal dinners, the kitchen staff had grumbled about tradition. Each change, no matter how minor, seemed to create friction. As afternoon approached, Camilla found herself standing in the mirror room, looking at her reflection surrounded by ornate golden frames. The woman staring back at her wore the crown, bore the title, and carried the weight of centuries of royal tradition. But did she truly command the respect that should come with the position? The whispered conversations she had been hearing in hallways suddenly made sense. Staff members would stop talking when she approached, their faces carefully neutral but their eyes telling a different story. Even the younger staff members, who she had hoped might be more accepting of change, seemed influenced by their senior colleagues' attitudes. Margaret entered the mirror room quietly, her face grave. "Your Majesty, they're ready for you in the blue drawing room." Camilla straightened her shoulders and adjusted her necklace, a piece that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth and somehow made her feel more connected to the legitimacy of her position. She knew this meeting would be unlike any other she had faced as Queen. The staff's discontent had reached a boiling point, and today would determine whether she could truly lead or whether she would remain a figurehead, tolerated rather than respected, walking toward the blue drawing room. Camilla reflected on her journey to this moment. She had never expected to be queen, having spent decades as the controversial figure who had come between Charles and Diana. The public's acceptance had been grudging at best, and now it seemed even those closest to the throne questioned her authority. The massive doors to the blue drawing room loomed ahead, guarded by 2 members of the royal guard who stood at perfect attention. Their faces revealed nothing, but Camilla wondered what thoughts lay behind their professional expressions. In a few moments she would face a room full of people who had served the monarchy with unwavering dedication for decades. People who now seemed to doubt whether she deserved their loyalty. As Margaret reached for the door handles, Camilla took a deep breath. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would define her reign and determine whether she could truly claim her place as queen, or whether she would forever remain an outsider wearing someone else's crown. The blue drawing room fell silent as Queen Camilla entered. 12 of the palace's most senior staff members stood in a semicircle, their faces a mixture of determination and nervousness. Captain Morrison stood at the center, his military bearing more pronounced than usual, while the others flanked him like soldiers preparing for battle. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows cast dramatic shadows across their faces, making the scene feel more like a tribunal than a staff meeting. Camilla took her place at the head of the room, standing rather than sitting in the ornate chair that had been prepared for her. She wanted to meet this challenge on equal footing, not from a position that might seem defensive. Margaret discreetly positioned herself near the door, her notebook ready but her expression worried. "I understand you requested this meeting," Camilla began, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "Please speak freely." Captain Morrison stepped forward slightly, his medals catching the light as he moved. At 52, he had served in the British Army before joining the Royal Guard, and his weathered face bore the authority of someone accustomed to command. His gray eyes met Camilla's directly as he began to speak. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying the crisp precision of military training, "we have served this monarchy with absolute devotion for a combined total of over 300 years among us." He gestured to his colleagues, each of whom nodded solemnly. "We have witnessed the grace and dignity that has always defined the crown." The head butler, William Hartwell, shifted slightly, his 60-year-old frame still imposing despite the silver hair that had replaced the dark brown of his younger years. Beside him stood Mrs. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, the chief housekeeper, whose stern expression had intimidated countless junior staff members over her 30-year career. "We are concerned," Captain Morrison continued, "about recent changes that seem to diminish the reverence and protocol that have preserved this institution for over 1,000 years. The monarchy's strength has always come from its unwavering adherence to tradition and ceremony." Camilla felt her pulse quicken, but she maintained her composure. "Which specific changes concern you, Captain Morrison?" William Hartwell spoke up, his voice carrying the educated accent that came from decades of serving nobility. "Your Majesty, the informal dinner arrangements, the relaxed protocol during state visits, the casual photographing of private moments. These changes suggest a lack of understanding of what the monarchy represents to the British people and the Commonwealth." Mrs. Fitzpatrick nodded emphatically. "The staff have always taken pride in maintaining the highest standards. When those standards are adjusted, it affects morale throughout the entire household." Her words were carefully chosen, but their meaning was unmistakable. Camilla walked slowly to the large window overlooking the palace gardens, where tourists gathered outside the gates, many holding cameras and hoping for a glimpse of royal life. "I see," she said quietly, then turned back to face the assembled staff. "And you believe I don't understand what the monarchy represents?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Captain Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, while several other staff members exchanged quick glances. The silence stretched until Mrs. Fitzpatrick decided to break it. "Your Majesty. We mean no disrespect, but—" She paused, gathering courage for what she was about to say. "Many of us remember serving Queen Elizabeth. We remember the dignity, the unwavering adherence to protocol, the way she commanded respect through consistency and tradition." The comparison to Elizabeth was like a knife thrust. Camilla had known it would come eventually, but hearing it spoken aloud in front of the senior staff still stung. Elizabeth had been revered, loved, and respected in ways that Camilla knew she might never achieve. The late Queen's portrait seemed to watch from its place on the wall, a constant reminder of the standard against which Camilla would always be measured. "Queen Elizabeth was indeed remarkable," Camilla replied, her voice gaining strength. "She served for over 70 years and earned her place in history through decades of dedicated service. However, times change, and the monarchy must evolve while maintaining its core values." Captain Morrison's expression hardened. "Your Majesty, with respect. Some of us question whether these changes truly represent evolution or simply reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of royal duty." The words hit their target with precision. Around the room, several staff members nodded slightly, their agreement with Morrison's assessment clear despite their attempts to remain diplomatically neutral. The head gardener, Thomas Wickham, who had maintained the palace grounds for 20 years, stepped forward. "Your Majesty. When visitors see informal dining arrangements or casual protocol, they don't see modernization. They see a decrease in the reverence they expect from their sovereign. We've heard the comments from dignitaries and state visitors." Margaret shifted uncomfortably near the door, her loyalty to Camilla warring with her recognition that the staff's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. She had indeed fielded several discreet inquiries from visiting officials who seemed surprised by some of the recent changes to royal protocol. Camilla felt the weight of their collective judgment pressing down on her. These were people who had dedicated their lives to serving the crown, who understood royal tradition better than almost anyone alive. Their resistance wasn't born from malice, but from genuine concern about protecting an institution they loved. "I appreciate your dedication and your concerns," Camilla said carefully. "However, I am the Queen. The decisions about protocol and modernization are mine to make." Captain Morrison straightened even further, if that was possible. "Yes, Your Majesty, you hold the title. But earning the respect that comes with it requires more than simply wearing the crown." The statement was delivered with military bluntness, stripping away any pretense of diplomatic language. Around the room, the tension ratcheted higher as the other staff members realized Morrison had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Mrs. Fitzpatrick gasped softly, while William Hartwell's eyes widened at Morrison's boldness. Even Margaret took a step forward, unsure whether she should intervene or remain silent. Camilla's hands trembled slightly, but whether from anger or hurt wasn't clear. The man charged with protecting her life had just publicly questioned her worthiness to hold the very position he was sworn to serve. The moments stretched endlessly as everyone in the room waited to see how their queen would respond to such an unprecedented challenge to her authority. The silence that followed Captain Morrison's challenge felt infinite. Queen Camilla stood perfectly still, her green eyes fixed on the man who had just questioned her legitimacy in front of the most senior members of her household. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the blue drawing room's ornate carpet, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of tourists outside the palace gates seemed to mock the tension within these historic walls. Camilla's mind raced through decades of preparation for this moment, though she had never imagined it would come in quite this way. She thought of the years spent at Charles's side, learning protocol, studying constitutional law, and gradually accepting that she might one day wear the crown. She remembered the countless public appearances where she had faced hostile crowds, the newspaper headlines that questioned her every move, and the gradual, grudging acceptance she had fought so hard to achieve. "Captain Morrison," she said finally, her voice carrying a new quality that none of the staff had heard before. It was neither angry nor defensive, but something altogether more powerful, the voice of someone who had decided to stop apologizing for their position. You speak of earning respect through more than wearing the crown. Tell me, what exactly do you think I haven't earned? Morrison's military training kept his face impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. He had expected anger or hurt, not this calm, direct challenge. Around him, the other staff members seemed to lean forward slightly, sensing that the dynamic in the room was shifting in ways none of them had anticipated. "Your Majesty," Morrison replied carefully, "earning respect requires understanding the weight of tradition, the importance of maintaining standards that have preserved this monarchy through centuries of change." Camilla walked slowly toward the center of the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor with deliberate precision. "I see. And in your expert opinion, Captain Morrison, how many years does one need to serve this institution before understanding its traditions?" 5? 20? The question caught Morrison off guard. William Hartwell and Mrs. Fitzpatrick exchanged worried glances, realizing that their queen was not responding as they had expected. This wasn't the defensive reaction of someone intimidated by their collective challenge. "I have served at Charles's side for over 30 years, Camilla continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I have attended thousands of state functions, learned hundreds of protocols, and studied every aspect of constitutional monarchy. I have been scrutinized by the press, investigated by Parliament, and examined by the public more thoroughly than perhaps any royal consort in history." She stopped directly in front of Morrison, close enough that he had to look down slightly to meet her eyes. "You question whether I understand royal duty, Captain? I have been fulfilling royal duties since before some of your junior staff members were born." Margaret watched from near the door, amazed at the transformation taking place before her eyes. This wasn't the tentative, apologetic queen who had often seemed uncertain of her authority. This was someone claiming their rightful place with absolute conviction. Mrs. Fitzpatrick cleared her throat nervously. "Your Majesty, we meant no personal disrespect. Our concerns are purely about maintaining the dignity of the crown." Camilla turned toward the chief housekeeper, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Mrs. Fitzpatrick, you have served this household with distinction for 30 years. In that time, how many changes to protocol have you witnessed? How many adaptations has this monarchy made to remain relevant to the people it serves?" The older woman shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that she was being led somewhere she hadn't expected to go. "Well, Your Majesty, there have been various adjustments over the years." "Adjustments," Camilla repeated. Queen Elizabeth herself modernized countless traditions. She allowed television cameras into Westminster Abbey for her coronation when advisors warned it would diminish the mystery of monarchy. She began the tradition of walkabouts to meet ordinary citizens. She opened Buckingham Palace to tours, started the Queen's Christmas broadcast, and modernized the honor system. William Hartwell's expression began to change as he realized where this conversation was heading. The Queen was not simply defending her changes, she was placing them within a historical context that made resistance seem almost disloyal to Elizabeth's own legacy. Every generation of royals has faced the same challenge. Camilla continued, now addressing the entire room. How to honor the past while serving the present. How to maintain dignity while remaining relevant. How to preserve tradition while embracing necessary change. She walked to Queen Elizabeth's portrait and stood beneath it, the symbolism unmistakable. "You compare me to Queen Elizabeth, and rightfully so. She set an extraordinary standard. But Elizabeth herself was once questioned, once doubted, once forced to prove her worthiness to skeptical advisors and resistant staff members." Captain Morrison's military bearing began to waver slightly. He had expected a confrontation about protocol and dignity, not a lesson in royal history that reframed his criticism as part of an ancient pattern of resistance to change. "The question is not whether I understand tradition, Captain Morrison. The question is whether you understand that I am not trying to destroy tradition. I am trying to ensure its survival." Camilla's words carried a conviction that filled the room, making it impossible for anyone present to doubt her sincerity, Thomas Wickham, the head gardener, who had remained silent until now, spoke up hesitantly. Your Majesty, we have always served faithfully, regardless of personal opinions about change. And I appreciate that faithful service, Thomas. All of you have dedicated your lives to this institution. And that dedication is precisely why I need you to understand something crucial. She paused, looking around the room to ensure she had everyone's complete attention. I am not asking for your approval of every change I make. I am not requesting your permission to modernize protocols that need updating. I am not seeking your validation for decisions that are mine alone to make. Her voice carried a finality that made it clear she was approaching the heart of her message. What I am telling you is this. I am your queen. Not your provisional queen, not your temporary queen. Not your queen subject to your approval. The words rang through the room with undeniable authority. I am your queen, and I will remain your queen until the day I die or abdicate, which I have no intention of doing. The transformation was complete. The woman who had entered this room uncertain and defensive had become someone entirely different, someone who commanded rather than requested, someone who declared rather than negotiated. The power in Queen Camilla's voice seemed to reverberate through the blue drawing room long after she had finished speaking. The 12 senior staff members stood motionless, each processing the complete transformation they had just witnessed. This was no longer a woman seeking their approval or defending her decisions. This was their sovereign asserting her absolute authority. Captain Morrison's face had gone pale beneath his military tan. As head of the Royal Guard, he had sworn an oath to protect and serve the crown with unwavering loyalty. That oath suddenly felt much heavier than it had when he had walked into this room planning to challenge the woman who wore it. Your Majesty, he began, his voice noticeably less confident than before, but Camilla raised her hand to silence him. I am not finished, Captain Morrison. Her words cut through the air with surgical precision. You mentioned that some of you question whether I truly understand what the monarchy represents to the British people and the Commonwealth. Allow me to enlighten you about what I understand. She moved away from Queen Elizabeth's portrait and walked toward the large windows that overlooked the palace courtyard. Outside, the changing of the guard was taking place, the red-uniformed soldiers moving with the same precision that had characterized this ceremony for centuries. I understand that every morning, millions of people across the Commonwealth begin their day with the knowledge that their monarch serves as a symbol of continuity in an uncertain world. I understand that tourists travel thousands of miles to stand outside these gates because they believe in something larger than themselves. I understand that the crown represents stability, dignity, and service above self. Mrs. Fitzpatrick dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, suddenly feeling ashamed of her earlier criticism. William Hartwell found himself remembering his own early days of service, when he had made mistakes and needed guidance rather than judgment. But I also understand something that perhaps some of you have forgotten, Camilla continued, turning back to face the room. The monarchy's greatest strength has never been its rigid adherence to outdated protocols. Its strength has been its ability to evolve while maintaining its core values. Its strength has been its willingness to serve the people rather than expecting the people to serve it. Thomas Wickham shifted uncomfortably, remembering conversations he had heard among the younger staff members, who had expressed appreciation for the Queen's more approachable style. Perhaps their concerns about dignity had been misplaced. When I allow more informal dining arrangements for visiting dignitaries, I am not diminishing the Crown's dignity. I am showing that the Crown is confident enough in its own worth that it doesn't need elaborate ceremony to command respect. When I permit candid photographs during state functions, I am not cheapening royal tradition. I am demonstrating that the monarchy has nothing to hide and everything to be proud of. Margaret watched from her position near the door, feeling a mixture of pride and amazement. She had served 3 monarchs in her career, and she had never seen anyone claim their authority with such complete conviction. Captain Morrison straightened his shoulders, his military instincts responding to the unmistakable voice of command. Your Majesty, we have served faithfully and will continue to do so. Our concerns were born from loyalty to the institution, not from any desire to undermine your authority. I know that, Captain Morrison. Your loyalty to the crown is unquestioned, which is precisely why I need you to understand that loyalty to the crown means loyalty to the person who wears it. It means trusting that person's judgment, even when you don't fully understand their decisions. She walked back to the center of the room, now occupying the space with complete authority. Every eye remained fixed on her, and the earlier atmosphere of confrontation had been replaced by something approaching reverence. You want to preserve the monarchy's dignity? Then serve your queen with the same devotion you showed her predecessors. You want to maintain tradition? Then remember that the greatest tradition of the crown is adaptation and service. You want to protect this institution? Then help me lead it into the future rather than trying to anchor it to the past. William Hartwell was the first to bow, a deep, formal bow that acknowledged not just her title but her authority. Your Majesty, we pledge our continued faithful service. One by one, the other staff members followed suit, each bow representing a recognition that they had just witnessed something remarkable, not just a queen defending her position, but a queen truly claiming it for the first time. Mrs. Fitzpatrick's bow was accompanied by tears that she didn't try to hide. Your Majesty, we have been honored to serve you, and we will continue to be honored to serve you. Thomas Wickham's voice was barely above a whisper. Your Majesty, we spoke from concern, but we understand now that our concerns were misplaced. You have shown us what true leadership looks like. Captain Morrison remained standing, his eyes fixed on Camilla with an intensity that made the room hold its breath. The head of the royal guard had not yet bowed, had not yet acknowledged her authority, and everyone present understood that his response would determine whether this confrontation ended in unity or continued division. The silence stretched endlessly as Camilla met Morrison's gaze directly, neither challenging nor pleading, simply waiting. She had said what needed to be said, claimed what needed to be claimed, and now the choice was his. Finally, Morrison spoke, his voice carrying the full weight of his military training and years of service. Your Majesty, he said, and then paused, the next words clearly difficult for him to say. I have served this crown for 15 years, and I have never... He stopped. Struggling to find the right words, Camilla waited patiently, recognizing that this was a man wrestling with a fundamental change in his understanding of leadership and authority. Your Majesty, Morrison began again, I have never seen anyone claim their rightful place with such complete authority. We questioned your understanding of royal duty, but you have shown us that we were the ones who didn't understand. His bow, when it finally came, was deeper and more respectful than any of the others. The transformation in the room was complete. What had begun as a challenge to Camilla's authority had become a demonstration of it. The staff members who had entered this room doubting their queen's worthiness now stood before a woman who had claimed her crown with absolute conviction. The afternoon sun had moved significantly across the sky by the time the meeting in the blue drawing room concluded. Queen Camilla stood alone in the vast space, watching through the tall windows as her staff members walked across the courtyard below, their body language completely different from when they had entered her presence an hour earlier, where there had been rigid determination and barely concealed resistance. There was now something approaching reverence in their movements. Margaret approached quietly, her notebook closed and her expression mixing admiration with amazement. Your Majesty, in 30 years of service to the crown, I have never witnessed anything quite like that. Camilla turned from the window, her face showing the exhaustion that comes after a profound emotional and psychological battle. Margaret, there comes a moment in every reign when a monarch must choose between being tolerated and being truly accepted. Today was my moment. The transformation that had occurred in that room would ripple throughout Buckingham Palace in ways that neither Camilla nor her staff could fully anticipate. Within hours, word of the Queen's declaration would spread through every department, every corridor, and every corner of the royal household. The message was clear and unmistakable. Queen Camilla was no longer asking for acceptance. She was commanding it. Captain. Morrison returned to the royal guard quarters with a completely different perspective on the woman he had sworn to protect. His conversation with his fellow guards that evening would become legendary within their ranks. "I went in there thinking I was speaking to someone playing at being queen," he would tell them. "I left knowing I had just met a true monarch." The change in Morrison's attitude was perhaps the most significant of all. As head of the royal guard, his opinion carried enormous weight throughout the palace. His unwavering respect for Camilla, after that meeting, sent a clear signal to every member of the household staff. Their queen had proven herself worthy of complete loyalty within a week. The effects of that afternoon meeting became visible throughout the palace. Staff members who had previously carried out Camilla's requests with reluctant compliance now executed them with genuine enthusiasm. The informal dinner arrangements that had once caused grumbling were now managed with pride. As the staff understood, they were part of a deliberate modernization rather than a casual disregard for tradition. Mrs. Fitzpatrick found herself defending the Queen's changes to newer staff members who questioned them. "Her Majesty understands tradition better than any of us," she would say firmly. "She's not changing things carelessly. She's evolving them purposefully." William Hartwell discovered that the more relaxed protocols actually enhanced, rather than diminished, the dining experience for visiting dignitaries. Foreign officials consistently commented on the warmth and accessibility they felt from the British royal household, praising the perfect balance between formality and approachability. The palace kitchen staff, who had initially resisted serving more contemporary cuisine at formal dinners, now took pride in creating menus that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The head chef would later describe it as cooking for a queen who understands that the best way to honor the past is to serve the present. Thomas Wickham's transformation was particularly remarkable. The head gardener, who had once questioned the Queen's understanding of royal dignity, became one of her most devoted supporters. He began incorporating subtle modernizations into the palace gardens. Understanding now that evolution and tradition could coexist beautifully, the younger staff members, who had always been caught between their natural appreciation for Camilla's approachable style and pressure from their seniors to maintain rigid protocols, now felt liberated to serve their queen with genuine warmth. The palace atmosphere became noticeably lighter, more efficient, and more welcoming. Margaret observed these changes with fascination, documenting in her private diary how a single afternoon had transformed not just individual attitudes but the entire culture of the royal household. "The Queen didn't just win their respect," she wrote. "She showed them what respect actually means." The impact extended beyond the palace walls. Visiting officials and dignitaries began commenting on the remarkable efficiency and warmth of the royal household. Foreign newspapers that had once criticized Camilla's modernization efforts now praised the British monarchy's perfect balance of tradition and accessibility. Social media sentiment, which had been consistently divided about Queen Camilla, began shifting noticeably positive. Stories leaked by palace staff about the Queen's leadership and vision painted a picture of a monarch who was both respectful of tradition and boldly forward-thinking. Most importantly, the Queen herself had undergone a fundamental transformation. The uncertainty and defensiveness that had characterized her early months on the throne were replaced by calm confidence and natural authority. She no longer entered rooms hoping for acceptance. She entered them knowing she belonged there. The phrase, "I'm still your queen," became legendary within the palace, though few outside those walls would ever know its origin. Staff members would use it as shorthand for the moment when Queen Camilla truly claimed her crown. It represented not just a declaration of authority, but a transformation of understanding about what that authority meant. Years later, historians would look back on that afternoon in the blue drawing room as the defining moment of Camilla's reign. It was the day she stopped being Charles's widow wearing Elizabeth's crown and became Queen Camilla in her own right. It was the day the palace staff stopped serving out of duty and began serving out of genuine respect. Captain Morrison, reflecting on that afternoon months later, would tell his successor that he had learned something crucial about leadership that day. "True authority isn't something you demand," he said. It's something you claim so completely that others have no choice but to recognize it. The blue drawing room itself seemed different after that day. Staff members who had to clean and maintain it often remarked that the room felt more peaceful, as if the tension that had built up over months of resistance had finally been released. The space where Queen Camilla had declared her authority had become a symbol of her transformation from reluctant monarch to true queen. The palace had indeed been silenced, but not in defeat, in recognition. The woman who had once apologized for wearing the crown now wore it with absolute conviction, and everyone around her understood that Queen Camilla's reign had truly begun.